season is amongst us, so this is a very timely discussion. However, we want to deepen the conversation to also discuss the very important role that your biochemistry and brain health plays in weight loss. So before we get started, I'll tell you about Mensah Medical. Mensah Medical provides a drug-free molecular approach to healing using advanced nutrient therapy protocols. We also refer to this as molecular medicine. Each prescription is composed of specific vitamins, minerals, and amino acid compounds. And these prescriptions are unique to address each individual's chemical imbalances. And also, these prescriptions are prescribed at a therapeutic level, which means these doses are several times higher than the RDA. And together, Dr. Mensah and the co-founder of Mensah Medical, Dr. Judith Bowman, have successfully treated several thousand patients with various conditions. Some of the conditions are listed on the right to your screen. You see they range from pyroluria to bulimia to schizophrenia and more. So I'll start by introducing Samantha Gilbert. Samantha is a nutritional therapist, transformation coach, and certified holistic nutrition practitioner. She specializes in customized nutritional therapies for biochemical imbalances. She is a graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University, and she founded Samantha Gilbert Nutritional Therapy in 2008. She has successfully helped several thousand patients with various conditions. Also, Dr. Mensah is a family practice physician. He is board certified in integrative pediatrics by the American Association of Integrative Medicine. He is an adjunct professor of clinical medicine. He serves on the board at Walsh Research Institute and is a clinical instructor for WRI's international doctor training programs around the world. You'll see that some of the research we cite tonight comes from Dr. Bill Walsh, who founded the Walsh Research Institute. He is co-founder of the newly created not-for-profit Mensah Research Institute. He earned his undergraduate degree from Northwestern University and his medical degree from French University of Health Sciences at the Chicago Medical School. He completed his residency in family medicine at Swedish Covenant Hospital, and he co-founded Mensah Medical in 2008 with Dr. Judith Bowman. So now I'll turn it over to Dr. Mensah, who will discuss the overview for tonight.
Hello, everyone who's joined us tonight. Thank you for tuning in, so to speak. Tonight we're going to hear a little bit about Samantha's story, sort of an aha moment, reflection, and the truth. We're also going to look at how neurotransmitters influence weight and the underlying chemistries that create dysregulation. Where is diet dogma wrong? Where is it incorrect? You'd be surprised. We'll look at how biotypes of chemistry affect hormonal regulation. We'll look at eating disorders, lesser-known causes of weight gain, and healing with Samantha. And then, of course, we'll talk a bit about the Mensah Medical approach. But most importantly, what we're both really excited about, that is Samantha and I, is the question and answer session. We really want to get to be able to talk as much as we can about your concerns and considerations.
All right, so Samantha, we'll turn it over to you and let you introduce your story.
Wonderful. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that, and thank you, Dr. Mensah, for having me. I'm excited to be here this evening and be a part of this really, really important webinar. And this is these are topics after my own heart. I think I'll just start with letting all of our listeners know. Many of you know me. Many of you work with myself as well as Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman. But many of you don't know that I am also a patient. I've been a patient for several years now. The molecular approach has, in advanced nutrient therapy, has really helped me significantly. So kind of to just start off, you know, I have an epigenetic history of copper toxicity and undermethylation. I also had thyroid disorder in childhood. Now, Dr. Mensah and I are going to get into what epigenetics means in a moment. But essentially, I have the same chemistry as my mother and a lot of the other women in my family. My mother and I, our numbers in terms of copper toxicity and undermethylation are almost identical. So that's basically what epigenetics means. But as I shared, we're going to get into that in just a little bit. Another interesting thing about my chemistry, and this is something that we call an environmental factor, that's a trigger for the underlying epigenetics of an individual, is that I was vaccine injured when I was a year and a half. And that resulted in pretty significant hearing loss in both ears. I never got it back. I've always worn hearing aids. But it's interesting that, I developed my speech early on, so you would never know unless my hair is pulled back or you happen to be standing next to me. It's quite a conversation starter. But that's an interesting clue into my epigenetic background, because we know that environmental triggers also affect our epigenetic history. Environmental triggers include vaccines. So essentially, as I was sharing, a vaccine injury is an environmental trigger to a pre-existing epigenetic condition that I had. And so that resulted in a permanent severe hearing loss in both ears. And I've worn hearing aids most of my life. My parents didn't realize the loss until I was 3 years old, because my mom always says, you kept asking me to turn up the TV, and we were noticing that you just weren't responding. So that was a trigger. So that triggered off my own mutations that I had that were pre-existing, that run in my family, and created a severe struggle with depression, anxiety, and lots of OCD, especially around food in my body. Before the webinar this evening, I was thinking about behaviors that I used to do, like standing in front of a mirror, analyzing my body all the time. A lot of self-hate, a lot of negative self-talk that I used to do. And all of those behaviors are gone as a result of advanced nutrient therapy. And today, my depression is gone, my anxiety. I think the last thing to really go with my OCD, certainly I can be a little bit OCD from time to time. I think most of us can. But to the extreme that it was, that has completely been eliminated. And I'm able to live a normal, healthy, and very joyful life. Another thing I'll add is, I've been anywhere from as low as a size 0 up to a size 16. So, just to give you kind of an idea, I know a lot of the ladies that are listening in, they can relate to this obsession with body image. Now, a lot of that is our society perpetuates that, but also it's chemistry. And that's what I'm really excited to talk about and share with you in more detail this evening.
Thank you, Samantha.
All right, thank you very much, Samantha. That's always, in many respects, very heart-wrenching yet inspiring to hear what it is that you've been through, and we thank you for sharing that. Let's get into how neurotransmitters actually may influence your weight. We have to look at a much larger picture before we delve into the nitty-gritty, shall we say. Behavior and thought processes actually can be influenced by nutrient deficiencies as well as nutrient overloads. These nutrient deficiencies and overloads actually impact neurotransmitter regulation. It is nutrients that we find are the key movers and shakers for the production of and the balance of neurotransmitter activity. Normalizing brain function helps the body to actually maintain an appropriate weight. Biochemical imbalances can produce symptoms like anxiety and depression, which lead many people to turn to food as a way of self-medicating, comfort food, stress foods. What are neurotransmitters? Neurotransmitters, you've heard of them. You just may not have recognized them. Serotonin, that's that lovely stuff you find in chocolate, ladies and gentlemen, that makes you feel just so good. Dopamine, another very lovely calming neurotransmitter. Norepinephrine, also known as a precursor to adrenaline, your fight or flight neurotransmitter. These are the chemicals that allow the nerves in your brain and throughout your system to talk to one another. So whatever is happening at the neurotransmitter level can be very key in how you perceive and interact with the world. So many people actually turn to food as a way of self-medicating because they are in discomfort because of what their neurotransmitters are doing in terms of an imbalance or an irregulation. Additionally, the wrong nutrients for your biochemistry can actually affect your genetic expression. That is, the wrong nutrients can actually turn on bad genes and turn off protective genes. So you see, folks, just because something is natural doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you as an individual. What is epigenetics? In the techie world these days, let's just say that epigenetics would be akin to the software for your DNA's hardware. It influences how some genes are expressed in your body. It examines what happens to your genes over the course of your life and whether those genes could be passed down to your children and grandchildren. Now, when I say it, I mean the field of epigenetics, the study of environmental influences that will look at and determine what might be happening throughout your lineages from henceforth. Genetic testing, like the MTHFR, may offer an idea, but cannot determine the net effect of all mutations in your body. And therefore, what your system is really doing can't always be determined by genetic testing. Let's talk about nutrients and gene expression themselves. Methyl groups or methyl molecules control genetic expression by binding to a gene. They actually attach themselves to a gene and they basically say, hey, turn on or turn off. Methyl molecules themselves are actually carbon atoms with 3 or 4 hydrogen molecules attached. Methyl groups regulate enzymes, hormones, and neurotransmitters. They are also cofactors, which are often vitamins and minerals that help enzyme activity and therefore system-wide function. So methyl molecules, as well as other vitamins and nutrients, are all involved in the regulation of the system. We used to just know, we just knew for sure that enzymes were the real keys to how we move throughout the world, how we balance, how we regulate ourselves. Now we understand that cofactors wield real power. Where diet dogma goes wrong, we are all biochemically unique, which means that there's no such thing as a universal diet for everyone. Now, folks, when we're talking about this, we're talking about healthy brain function. We're not talking about just the body. And a lot of people have been thinking, and a lot of books are out there, and a lot of practitioners talk about what's good for the body is good for the brain and vice versa. And folks, that simply is not true when it comes to the field of mental health. What's good for the body is not necessarily good for the brain. And we'll talk more about those examples later. Nutrients are powerful, and more damage is created sometimes by taking too much as opposed to taking nothing at all of any given nutrient. Samantha, would you like to chime in there on that one?
Yeah, I love this slide because, and I appreciate what you said, Dr. Mensah, because every single day when I work with a patient, I hear so much about, well, I have to do this certain diet, or I have to be, I have to be raw vegan, or I have to be paleo, or I'm doing AIT paleo, and it's still not working. And the reason why it's still not working, folks, is because these diets are not appropriate for who you are biochemically. You are unique. You are precious. And your diet needs to match that. And so that's why Dr. Mensah and I that's why we do what we do. And that's why we're so passionate and adamant about biochemical individuality. So this is really powerful. This is something that I hope our listeners understand, that when you go online and you're searching for the best diet for you, that unfortunately it probably isn't, because what's online cannot reflect or know who you are biochemically.
Awesome. Thank you, Samantha. let's talk about biotypes and hormonal regulation. Now, we have this slide here exactly on purpose. On the left, we're talking about pyroluria. And on the right, the slide refers to copper toxicity. Now, you guys are saying, but wait a minute, okay, is this another technical error glitch? No, this one is not. This is intended. This slide is really trying to illustrate something very important. First of all, let's just talk about the words here. There's a direct relationship between copper and your hormones, for example. Okay, estrogen increases copper levels. Copper can actually lead to symptoms of anxiety and depression. There's an indirect relationship between pyrols and your general hormonal imbalances as well. That is, pyrols deplete your system of zinc and vitamin B6, two very important cofactors in the production of neurotransmitters. And those neurotransmitters can in turn wreak havoc on your system by producing symptoms like anxiety and depression over the long run. Now, each of these chemistries can produce challenges to weight management. But now here's the real interesting point, because a lot of you, I've talked to a lot of you guys out there, and many of you say, well, you know what, I was just sure I had pyrrole disorder because I had 25 out of the 32 symptoms listed, you know, on the sheets and on the internet. And people with copper toxicity will often say the same thing. Here's the thing, folks, there are many symptoms that overlap between pyroluria and copper toxicity. Anxiety and depression just being a few of them. Poor focus and attention, fatigue, to say the least. So you actually have to get tested because many of your symptoms can look just like a variety of other biochemical imbalances. And you cannot just look and read as the average person, even the most well-read average person, cannot truly distinguish either without really testing. And the same for the doctors. What happens is that when we look at your symptoms, we say, okay, here's our list of things this could be. Now let's test you so that we know for sure. Okay. Now, other biotypes and hormonal regulation. On the left, we see the guy who looks like a classic undermethylator. Here we are. He's Joe Prosperous, probably a very good academic person. He dots his I's, crosses the T's. He's Mr. Corporate guy, probably a perfectionist. And, you know, in this case, you can kind of see he's a little bit slight of build, which is generally correct, but not 100%. On the right, we see our more creative guy. He's got the tattoos. He looks like he's doing something very illustrative or creative. He's a thicker individual. He's got lots of methyl on board. Methyl turns to creatine, which leads to muscle development. He is quite quintessentially what would look like an overmethylator. Here's what's really interesting. Now, folks, on the left, you see what looks like a very clean, healthy meal that is more vegetable-based. And on the right, you see a bird, a cooked bird of some type, okay? Now, what we're trying to illustrate here is that the lovely meal you see on your left here is typically what that guy on the left-hand side of the screen in the previous slide would be eating. He likes to keep himself regulated. He thinks this is the best way to go. On the right-hand side of the screen, our creative person in the previous slide, well, he's a carnivore extraordinaire. He believes he's got to go tear down that pterodactyl and chop it up into pieces and swallow it whole. Here's the real irony, folks. These two individuals are eating in a diametrically opposed fashion. If this is what they're consuming day in and day out, and they've got cognitive impairments, mental health issues, anxiety, depression, anything along those lines, they're actually eating the wrong way. They should switch. The fellow who's our thick individual should really be eating more like the chemistry, the diet on the left-hand side of the screen here. And our fellow who looks like the undermethylated person should really have more of that bird to the right, as opposed to going to either extreme. Samantha?
I love this slide because this was me in a nutshell. I, for years, was vegetarian, and I was very overly zealous about that. and then I became vegan, and then I became raw vegan, which is kind of the extreme, the most extreme I feel that you could go in terms of being vegan. Nothing can be cooked over 117 degrees. So again, I'm giving you insight into how intense my OCD was with food and my body. So the image on the left, I was eating a lot of high folate and high copper foods, which, as I learned later, were terrible for me and actually what created an eventual crash and burn for me, and that's when I went to see Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman. And what's interesting is that we find across the board that those that are undermethylated are always attracted to the foods on the left, the more vegetarian diet, because there's a desire to be slim and perfectionistic and beautiful. And the overmethylators, not that there isn't that desire, I don't mean to put everyone in a box, but generally with the more artistic types, they're going to go for more of those foods. So it's an interesting illustration of how what we think is healthy, because society tells us that it's healthy, is actually a big myth. And we're going to get into that in just a little bit. Thank you, Dr. Mensah.
Thanks, Sammy. Undermethylation, diet, and chemistry concerns. Folates actually make undermethylators feel worse. Now, I'm not talking about a little bit of folate. Folks, I'm talking about when you have more of an extreme consumption of folates. You know, you're eating your veggies 2 to 3 times a day, large concentrations, and very little protein. You need methyl from animal protein sources. These individuals, undermethylators, tend to be low in serotonin and dopamine in general, and they tend to have highly addictive tendencies, including disordered eating. The truth about plants. Sammy, why don't you go ahead and talk about this one?
My specialty, right? Yes, kind of expand on what I was just sharing a moment ago. I think that plants are important. They are a food source. But I don't feel, and this is just based on, clinical application and, working with thousands of patients. We are omnivores. We are omnivores. Now, it's true that an overmethylator, going back to Biotypes, does better with less protein, but they still need some protein. They need the folates. They do better on a higher folate diet. But what's interesting about plants is that science is uncovering how they communicate, how they protect one another, how they feel pain. Now, of course, they're not going to feel pain on the level that we feel pain, or a mammal will feel pain. But we're starting to learn more about the intricacies of who they are. And they have these interesting inherent chemical defense systems, or what we call anti-nutrients, things like oxalates, salicylates, etc., that can actually make humans and animals quite ill. So we have many, many patients with sensitivity to these anti-nutrients. So we have to be very careful initially when starting them off on a protocol. And I will tailor their dietary protocol not only to match their chemistry, but again, we want to make sure that we're not triggering anything. And then over time, if they start to feel better, we can start adding some more of these foods in because the tolerance is there. Also, another thing to keep in mind about plants is that some of them are really high in copper and folates. And again, going back to what I shared about my experience with vegetarianism and then veganism, and then I was raw vegan for 3 years, if you can believe I sustained it that long, is that I was eating, I might as well just sat down and had a bowl of copper every day. And I was juicing every morning, raw vegetable juice. I spent so much money on all these beautiful, wonderful organic vegetables. So I was juicing several times a day, living on salads. Lots of nuts and seeds because, on a raw vegan diet, you're sprouting your nuts and seeds. And that's kind of your meat, if you will. But all of these foods were just contributing to my decline, even though I was obsessed with being a size 2 or a size 0. When I got to a size 0, that's when things really took a turn for the worse. So it's really important. Again, I just want to drive this home for all of our listeners that, the world will tell us this is a trend, follow this. But what Dr. Mensah and I are really trying to impress upon you with this webinar is get to know you, get to know who you are, let trends go, fall to the wayside, let diet dogma go, and just really get to know who you are biochemically.
Thank you, Sammy. I want to emphasize, and I'll probably do this throughout this webinar, we're not talking about the average person who lives an average balanced life and they're okay. We're talking about people who've got real challenges with anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, autism, all the categories of disarrangement that we talk about and treat. So please don't go around saying, well, Dr. Mensah and Sammy said, this is bad. No, we're not talking about that. Listen, if you're a balanced individual and you want to go graze in the backyard all day long, then so be it. And you're an undermethylator or a normal methylator. If you're a normal methylator, you want to, go chase buffalo all day long and eat them, do that. That's fine. But we're talking about people who've got these challenges. So please remember to frame everything we talk about within this particular context.
Expanding on that, I appreciate it.
Now let's talk about something really dear to my heart. Carbotarians and weight retention, okay? There are a lot of folks out there who claim really the bottom line is they're non-meat eaters, but they'll label themselves as vegetarians, and they're actually not. They're carbotarians because they find it very difficult to maintain their energy levels and satiate their hunger strictly on vegetables, so they tend to do more in terms of carbs. And so this is something that we want to just talk a little bit about here, because excessive carbs can be extremely destructive. Now here's an exception, whether you have mental health issues or not, okay? Whether you have anxiety or not, an excess of carbs can truly lead you to insulin resistance. It can lead you to anxiety challenges, diabetes, hypertension, and the mix. So in this case, it is not good for either your body or your brain. Sammy?
Yeah, I love this document because I agree whether you have a methylation disorder or copper toxicity, pyroluria, or not. And this is the challenge again with kind of more of your vegan diet. And I actually have a lot of my own patients that are normally methylating and don't have some of the other challenges that we actually specialize in. But because they're leaning more toward a vegetarian diet, it does, as you shared, it leans more heavy carbohydrate. So they have other challenges in other areas. Cortisol starts to become an issue, as Dr. Mensah mentioned, insulin resistance. And also just want to really drive home stress. Stress is a powerful modulator of these things and will lead to insulin resistance. And it's those carbohydrates that is kind of perpetuates that cycle. So, yes, this is a really important issue to expand upon. And I know as we move along, we'll have the opportunity to get into more on the stress issue.
Now, I too have a confession to make. I am a non-closet carbotarian. I love bread. I come from a country where bread is life and life is bread. My father's an Episcopalian priest, and this is true. One day I was sitting in the audience during one of his sermons with my sister, and my father used the quote, "Man does not live by bread alone." And at the sprite age of 14, I leaned over to my sister and I said, "Yes, but we do." So eating bread is something I'm extremely fond of, but I also know it's extremely challenging for my body and my physiology. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the overmethylators, their diets, and their chemistry concerns. Truth be told, overmethylators thrive on folates. These should be the individuals who incorporate more fruits and veggies into their diet. They tend to be high in serotonin and high in dopamine. They oftentimes have food and chemical sensitivities. They can also have addictive tendencies. Really, theirs are due to having too much excitability in the brain. They just can't sort of settle things down. Their brains are always swirling. These are often very creative, very successful individuals, especially in the theater and the arts, in music. Anything that involves creativity, advertising, for example. But once again, the deal is interesting. They don't eat the way they should for their chemistries. They tend to move in the opposite direction. Let's talk a little bit about eating disorders in the United States. And Sammy, I'd like you to pick up on this one, please.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mensah. The rates are getting higher and higher, and the more patients that I get, the more young ladies that I work with, it's sad because I have young ladies starting at 8, 9 years old, and I remember because I was very young. I'll tell you a little story. When I was in grade school, there was a candy store, kitty corner to my grade school, and I got my little allowance from my parents. And I would go across the street, and that was the highlight of my day because I was an outsider in school. I had glasses, I had hearing aids, I was bullied. That was my solace. And I couldn't wait to rip open that whatchamacallit bar or, get out my Pez candy dispenser and just go to town. But, one thing that's interesting with the rise in eating disorders, again, bringing it back to chemistry, and especially with methylation disorders and what we see in undermethylation, which Dr. Mensah, I'd like you to expand on, but undermethylation with binge eating, again, it's that perfectionistic push and pull, and overmethylation, we see more anorexia. That's correct, Dr. Mensah, right?
Switch them. More bulimia.
Bulimia, yeah. I apologize. I meant to say bulimia instead of anorexia. But also something that is connected to this and that we see a lot is the prevalence of zinc deficiency. And zinc deficiency is a problem worldwide, but it's also an issue here in this country. And I think a lot of it has to do with, again, vegan diets, the trend of vegan diets, because the highest sources of zinc are actually animal fruits. And I'm sorry, but pumpkin seeds don't cut it. It's animal protein, specifically, red meat, that is going to be highest in zinc. So again, it's not just our culture as a whole, because I think that the perfectionistic culture that we live in, the vanity sizing that we see from designers, but also the chemistry has changed as the generations have progressed. Another little interesting thought that I was thinking on before we started, I have jeans in a size 4, a size 6, and a size 8, and they all fit me. So I know ladies, you often go into the dressing room and you think, you're a certain size, but you try something on and it's maybe bigger than what size you really are and you get upset. Please don't get upset. It's called vanity sizing. And it's just contributing, again, to this prevalence and this increase in eating disorders that we see that start at a very, very early age.
Thank you, Sammy. Let's look at some of the disordered eating patterns and their underlying chemistries. When we talk about OCD, for example, and OCPD, and some of you may not know, OCPD is in the old category, the obsessive compulsive personality disorder. OCD being obsessive compulsive disorder. Usually with OCD, you see the underlying chemistry of undermethylation. Individuals who have OCPD are typically over-methylated. Now here's the interesting thing about testing. We've tested a lot of people who are diagnosed with OCD and yet they come out over-methylated. And as a result of that, we actually tell them, we suggest to them that they may have the wrong diagnosis. Because really the chemistry is hard to shift in that direction by mistake. So when we look at these descriptors, we definitely need the testing to really sort of support or deny oftentimes what many a diagnosis may be on a mental health level. Being OCD about what you eat can cause a lot of emotional stress, and emotional markers change DNA. Dr. Bowman is rather famous, my partner Dr. Bowman, rather famous for talking about how in the old days, and I don't mean her old days, I mean the days of our ancestors, grandparents, great-grandparents, when a woman was pregnant, the most senior female around would often tell the family members, listen, don't cause this young lady any stress. Don't mark the baby. Quote, unquote, don't mark the baby. These were people who didn't have high school educations back in those days, but they understood that stress can definitely affect the developing baby. And what's even more disheartening is that that same stress that affects that baby, that child can then grow up to pass that stressor on to their children. Many people talk about emotional memory. Many people talk about inherited genetic memory. This is really what they're talking about. And this is what we reference in part as epigenetics. The environment. It can be an emotionally charged environment. It can be a biochemical environment. It can be a toxic environment. But nonetheless, any of these stressors can change the literal DNA in a developing embryo, fetus, young child, or an adult. And that can be transmitted to other generations. Samantha, why don't you start off with the case study of Tiffany?
Thank you, Dr. Mensah. This is a patient that I've been working with for quite some time. And when she came to us, she was really struggling with disordered eating. When I say disordered eating, Tiffany was a lot like me. She was, a binge eater. She was, it was this constant back and forth cycle of, 3 weeks on, green juice, working out, and then a week of binging, and then the cycle would start again, and that's a cycle that I'm very familiar with. She had a lot of chronic fatigue. Her moods were off, lots of depression, lots of intense anxiety, panic attacks. She had a lot of insomnia. She would wake up several times a night. I know a lot of our patients can relate to that. Another interesting factor is also lack of menstruation, and we see that a lot in methylation imbalances, especially undermethylation. And that was something that I struggled with for many, many years. I would go 2 or 3 years without anything. But of course, there was a lot of malnourishment going on because of my extreme dieting. But that is something that we see with methylation challenges. Another interesting thing to note, Tiffany has had 5 children. And so that was something that was very telling for me, because as we're kind of, talking about copper toxicity and pyroluria, direct and indirect relationships with hormones, we know, the copper-estrogen relationship. So to me, that was very telling when she shared that with me. So testing revealed high levels of copper, high histamine, which is what we refer to as undermethylation. Overmethylators will have a low whole blood histamine value. And she also had a lot of digestive and gut issues. And that's also very, very common, especially with zinc deficiency, because zinc is one of those wonderful raw building materials, one of those cofactors in methylation, in regulating copper, also in pyroluria. And so she had a lot of digestive issues that I knew needed to be addressed. So there's malabsorption, which is an inability to absorb nutrients from food, and her diet was more like me, more of a vegetarian type of diet. And that was a struggle for her to kind of move into eating more of a higher protein diet. But we needed to do that because when you have bacterial overgrowth, what do those guys feed on? Well, they love sugars, even from fruit, even if it's something like blueberries. They still love feeding on those guys. They love heavy starches, like sweet potatoes. I love sweet potatoes, but if you've got a super heavy yeast toxicity, which we see a lot in our patients, also in young people with hyperactivity, those types of heavy starches are not, and sugars are not going to be good choices. So we cleaned up her diet, got her on some good nutrients, and she's actually doing quite well.
Samantha, thank you. And you mentioned zinc there quite a bit, and it's very interesting. What people often don't really know is that zinc is so powerful, it literally goes down to the level of your DNA. It affects DNA functioning. It affects DNA repair. And so this is why we speak so heavily about zinc, because really to talk about everything zinc does, we take a week of seminars. Okay, it is that kind of prolific and powerful. So zinc deficiency is a really big deal, and dietary sources are very challenging. I love what Samantha did in really illustrating some of the real complexity. Chemistry can sometimes, at least on paper, be pretty easy, relatively speaking, okay, for the skilled practitioner. But implementing it can be very different, especially when it comes to diet. If you do have GI issues, gastrointestinal issues, and a significant number of our patients do, at least 30 to 40%, it becomes very hard to implement many of these changes. And you struggle to find balance. And that's where someone like Samantha comes in extremely handy, because she can really sort of guide you in the balance between gut and brain, and finding the right foods that are digestible and feasible for your malabsorptive or yeast issues, while at the same time not offending your brain chemistry. So Sammy, thank you so much for sharing that case study of Tiffany with us.
Thank you, Dr. Mensah.
Interestingly enough, I think many of you out there realize that weight gain can often be associated with many different medications, SSRIs, for example. But some of you may not have known that copper IUDs can also affect weight gain. Birth control pills, many of you have actually experienced that out there. And certainly hormone replacement therapy. Quite often, many people have gained weight as a result of that. So, especially with drugs, it's not quite so simple as to get just the effect you want. There's also the anti-effect, the one that you don't want, which, as we're talking about right now, is about weight gain. What can you do to understand your chemistry and jumpstart your weight loss? First of all, Samantha, I'd like you to talk about the first point, please. I think this is just so important.
Yes, thank you. For all of our listeners, I really want to encourage you to take a good look at your life. Are you happy? How is your digestion? How do you sleep at night? Do you fall asleep easily? Do you sleep well through the night? How do you feel when you get out of bed in the morning? What does your skin look like? What are your nails and your hair doing? I want to encourage you, and I say this out of love, and I say this to so many of my patients. I really want you to be honest. Is this really working for you? Or are you buying into some kind of dogma that the world is putting out there that says you need to be XYZ so you can look XYZ, which is a delusion. I'm going to be flat out honest with you. Learn from me and my mistakes. I spent too many years, I'm going to be 42 in a couple of months. I spent most of my life, 30 years, struggling with this and having this really awful relationship with food in my body. And I love what Dr. Mensah said in an earlier slide about how how emotional markers affect DNA. And this is what diet dogma does. We get into this cycle of hating ourselves and perfectionism, and that actually those emotions literally change our DNA. And then the stress that causes, the stress affects blood sugar, which can lead to insulin resistance that Dr. Mensah already talked about. So I just want to encourage you with that, and I hope that if anything, you'll leave this webinar taking a good look at how you're feeling and how you're functioning in life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sammy. You know, folks, I just could not say that any better. It's about dogma these days. And you know what's even worse? Today's dogma is tomorrow's fad. And you sit down, you realize how many different dietary cycles, regimens, food plans have you tried, and they're yesterday's news. So what does that tell you? Is that truth? Because truth is eternal. It does not change. So if you're moving from one situation to another, then you weren't experiencing truth. You're really dealing with fiction. So let's talk first about next steps. Get tested. If you don't know who you are biochemically, get tested and find out. That's the only way you're going to truly be able to say from a scientific perspective, what does you better food-wise, dietary-wise. There's also the trial and error methodology, which you can spend the next 60 years doing and never get a real answer that makes any sense. So save some time, energy, and money. Make that minor investment over the course of your life. Find out who you are biochemically. The other thing that we've got to be careful about is our support system. Who are we really hanging around? Are we hanging around positive people who are there to support us, or people who are there to reinforce what their belief systems are? And I think, Samantha, you've got some really important things to say here about that.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Mensah. Going back to my vegan years, I want to share with our listeners that was the community that I was immersed in. And it was a very, and there is no judgment. This is not a judgment whatsoever. So I hope that it doesn't come across that way. But I was with a community that had a very limited viewpoint and wouldn't look at or listen to any other viewpoints. It just said, you know, it's my way or the wrong way. If you are going to immerse yourself in this lifestyle, then great, you can hang out with us. If not, then, you know, figure it out on your own. And of course, for someone who was severely undermethylated, severely copper toxic, very sensitive, very, you know, fearful, a lot of high anxiety, of course, I'm going to stay in that community because that's the only community that I'm going to get love from, because I'm emotionally fragile. And I know many of our patients can relate to this. So again, I want to encourage you, even if you're struggling right now and you're suffering, I want to encourage you, and I say this to all my patients, please find a support system of people that are going to love you for who you are and come alongside you and not judge you. And people that are going to be open to understanding neurochemistry. We all know, and I think we all can agree, Dr. Mensah, that there's a lot of judgment still around mental health, despite the advances that have been made, despite the great work that you, Dr. Bowman, Dr. Walsh, have done over these, you know, many years. I think combined you have, almost 50 years or so of experience. Despite all of these wonderful advances, there's still the stigma around mental health. So I just, again, want to encourage you and learn from my story, learn from my poor judgment, really. That's what I call it. But thank you, Dr. Mensah.
Thank you, Sammy. And I want to be very clear and very fair to all of our listeners. We are not taking sides with regard to any particular philosophy of dietary regulation. You know, we understand that people who have real moral choices and moral decisions around what they eat. What we're simply emphasizing is that if you have a biochemical challenge, if you have cognitive dysregulation. That's the way I like to put it. I don't like the term mental health because your mental isn't ill. It's your brain that is dysregulated. And we're seeing that that can be put into regulation status. If you fall in this category, and here's the challenge, 65% of the individuals with any of these cognitive dysregulations are undermethylated. 35% are overmethylated. So now, if you start to look at this, yes, there's going to be more discussion about error or moving more towards the high vegetable side, the high folate side, because more of the folks are challenged with this than they are on the other side of the scale. But we do look at and emphasize both. We know quite a few carnivores who really should be moving in the other direction, okay? So please, it's about cognitive health, mental dysregulation, whatever you want to call it, but that's the real significance. We're not making moral or ethical or judgment calls on any individual person. We've had the exact opposite conversation with many a patient. You really need to have more vegetables and more folates in your diet, okay? What we're saying is find out, contact a skilled professional, rethink extremes, and if you don't know what your situation is biochemically, remember that balance is wisdom. A little bit of this can't hurt you for the most part. A little bit of that can't hurt you. How you prepare your food can hurt you. Okay, so don't go around saying, well, Dr. Mensah said I need more meat, so I'm grilling a steak and I'm slathering, you know, lots and lots of sauces on there. No, how you prepare the food is just as important. Okay.
But Dr. Mensah, if I could add on to that just for a moment, please.
Yes.
You know, I want to share with our listeners, I loved the vegan lifestyle. I did. And if I could have maintained that lifestyle, and if it had worked for me and my chemistry, I would have continued. I really did enjoy it. So I appreciate Dr. Mensah's words. This is not a judgment of any one particular, way of eating or lifestyle, but specific to the chemistries that we're talking about. For me, as an undermethylator, that was the worst thing I could have done. But someone who is overmethylated would do very well on a high folate diet. So I wanted to make sure that was clear, and I appreciate your words, Dr. Mensah.
Thank you, Sammy. Okay, Sammy, you want to talk about this size here?
Absolutely, yes, thank you. So essentially, the way I work is, again, based on biochemical individuality. I want to get to know you as a person, just like Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman do in their initial assessment and consultation with you. Other things that are also challenging that we kind of read throughout this webinar include digestive disorders and autoimmunity, which are separate but also a part of this overarching picture that we often see. So I want to make sure that I'm looking at the whole picture. That's what holistic means. So if we're looking at a holistic or functional model to medicine, it's important to me that I'm able to really get to know you as an individual. So again, there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all diet. Another interesting thing that I don't think people are aware of is that you can phase food nutrients and titration of food nutrients, just like Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman do with nutrients that they prescribe in the compounds that they put together for our patients. So that's, I think, a really important key to making this work, because so many people, as we touched on earlier, have a lot of food chemical sensitivity. Again, the oxalates, the salicylates, I could go on and on. And those are triggers. They're not the cause, it's the individual's chemistry. But again, it takes some skill in understanding that balance, especially in addition to an advanced nutrient therapy protocol. Also, another thing that's really important is in our fast-paced society, we don't realize how you eat is as important as what you eat. So again, we want to make sure the diet matches the biochemistry and the nutrient protocols. But also, you know, think about, are you eating, is it taking you 2 minutes to inhale your dinner, or are you taking your time? Again, going back to the stress response. When we eat under stress, that affects our digestion. So that's really important to me when I'm working with someone, that we understand that balance. And then, of course, I want to get to know your lifestyle. What is your lifestyle like? Are you traveling a lot? Are you an under-methylated powerhouse CEO? And we need to customize that. What is your lifestyle? So again, going back to really getting to know you. Thank you, Dr. Mensah.
Thank you, Sammy. And folks, I wanted to share with you something interesting. I remember when Sammy and I actually talked about this process and what she does with people, and this one area of the importance of how you eat and learning how to eat. It was very eye-opening for me, because we all sort of take this whole eating process for granted. Well, many of us do. And you sit down, and when you start thinking, well, wait a minute, what kind of music do I listen to while I eat, if I listen to music? Am I eating in front of the TV? How do I actually put the food in my mouth? My mother used to tell me stories of my grandfather, who would tell all of his kids, listen, you take one bite and you chew it. Now, Grandpa is an extremist. You chew it 20 times before you swallow. And what he was really saying was, pace yourself. Now, I'm not saying to do that. That's obviously, not the way that most people need to go here. But he was illustrating a point of eating and methodology. There's a way to go about this. And what I really love about what Samantha does is that she gets to that level of detail for you. Okay, now I don't want this to sound like I'm putting on an ad for Samantha. Samantha has my great admiration for the work that she does, and the novelty and the expertise that she puts into every single person. And I learn a lot from Samantha in terms of the food arena. And it's very important for us to realize every aspect of what we do relative to diet is extremely important if we have, it's extremely important, period, but even more important if we have attached anxieties or depressions or any other cognitive dysfunction. So thank you very much, Samantha. I want us to talk about that more in depth sometime. Perhaps that's an area for another webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Mensah.
Okay, well, feel free to contact us to see how you or a loved one can become a patient. For more information about excuse me, it's been a night, folks. For more information about Mensah Medical's antioxidant therapy for eating disorders, please contact Mensah Medical at telephone number 630-256-8308. You can also email us at nancy@mensahmedical.com or visit our website, or you can contact Dr. Catherine Buford.
All right, and Dr. Mensah mentioned me. I'm Catherine Buford, the Digital Media Director for Mensah Medical. If you have any questions, you can email me at catherine@mensahmedical.com with anything related to our webinars or any technological issues. But right now, we're really excited to answer your questions. So any questions that you have about anything you've heard tonight, or a question that maybe you had in mind before log on to this webinar, you can start popping those into the chat, and we're going to start. All right, and Dr. Mensah mentioned me. I'm Catherine Buford, the Digital Media Director for Mensah Medical. If you have any questions, you can email me at catherine@mensahmedical.com with anything related to our webinars or any technological issues. But right now, we're really excited to answer your questions. So any questions that you have about anything you've heard tonight, or a question that maybe you had in mind before log on to this webinar, you can start popping those into the chat, and we're going to start reviewing your questions right now. All right, so Janet shares, my nephew's daughter won't deal with anyone who eats meat. She is a typical overmethylator and bipolar, anorexic, etc. I think that Samantha kind of touched upon how that works. Anne asks, I have heard some practitioners say cold rice and cold potatoes are better to eat than hot. Do you think all carbs are created equal? Samantha, would you like to answer this one?
It's a great question. Thank you for this question. Yeah, that's when you cook and cool something like a potato. You can do it with sweet potatoes, organic sushi rice. You turn it into something called resistant starch. And the resistant starch is really interesting. If you Google it, you'll find lots of fascinating information about it. But it actually helps with blood sugar regulation. It's wonderful for satiation of the appetite. And it turns into kind of a different food, actually. Great question. I think that they are wonderful and appropriate. I use them often in my protocols, but again, we want to make sure if we're looking at someone that has a digestive issue, that we address that first. Because although resistant starch, the process of turning these carbohydrates, these starches into resistant starch is transformative, we have to be careful in how we approach that for someone with a digestive disorder.
All right. Thank you, Samantha. Mary asks, can you please explain the difference between OCPD and OCD?
Yes, it's not always easy for people to sort of get, but OCD is very specific in that many times the obsessions are really with a very limited number of areas. So, for example, it may be bacteria and hand washing. It may be counting or repeating your steps in a given direction. There is usually a hyper-thinking component where we talk about obsessions, and then there's an action that is taken, which is what we refer to as compulsions. Now, with the obsessive compulsive personality disorder, it can be anything at any given point in time. It can be that has the obsession around it. And usually there aren't so much compulsions that are related to it. So one moment somebody can be hyper-focused, if you will, on counting the number of times a fan spins, and then somebody mentions steak, and then that same person now switches to steak, and they're wondering, how is a steak made? How did it evolve? From which animal did it come from? And then another point in time, that person is hyper-focused on cleaning, vacuuming the living room, does it several times perhaps. So with the personality disorder, I want you to think about this globally. Your personality is you wherever you go. And so with a personality disorder, there is dysfunction more globally than with simply obsessive compulsive disorder, where there are pretty much 2 or 3 areas that are the primary focus or hyper-focus for that given individual.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mensah. Deb asks, Sammy, can you clarify when you say high histamine indicates an undermethylated individual? Does this mean if you get your histamine balanced with nutrient therapy, you no longer need to focus on a diet suited for undermethylation?
Oh, great question. The truth is, you will always be an undermethylator, just like I will always be an undermethylator. Now, do I enjoy a Caesar salad? Every once in a while, romaine is high in folates, by the way, even though it's not a dark green lettuce. I enjoy those things, but I don't have them very often. The truth is, the diet and the nutrients work together. So I would still be very careful of folates. And I would, when you enjoy them, do it once in a while. Of course, once we get you balanced and you're feeling good, you have a little more leeway. But just keep in mind that you will always be undermethylated.
Thank you, Samantha. Kevin asks, how should someone with pyrrole disorder and overmethylation eat? A balanced diet or a high folate diet?
I had a hard time hearing that. Would you repeat that, please, Dr. Buford?
Yes. Kevin asks, how should someone with pyrrole disorder and overmethylation eat? A balanced diet or a high folate diet?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't think we went into this, Dr. Mensah, because the truth is it's rare that we have a patient with just one chemistry. Mm-hmm. We often see females that are over and undermethylated and copper toxic. We often see pyroluria, copper toxicity, zinc deficiency, gut dysbiosis, and methylation issues.
Yes.
If you're over methylated and you have pyroluria. Now, in pyroluria, you need to be mindful of omega-3s. There's going to be, pyroluria in and of itself is a zinc and B6 deficiency because they latch onto those nutrients. You still need to maintain a high folate diet, but you also need some protein in there. So don't be afraid to have protein. Don't be afraid of B6-rich proteins like chicken and turkey, things like grass-fed meat, high-quality grass-fed meats that are going to be high in zinc. So in this instance, and in so many other instances that we have, we need to make sure that we're getting to know who you are, but we want to address both chemistries together. And Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman always do that in their compounded nutrients, and then with the diet, yes, I will go in and absolutely recommend using those folates to help you feel better, but there needs to be that balance there. I hope that answered your question.
I want to just chime in here for one moment. What Samantha is really talking about is ratio. So you've got both pyro disorder and overmethylation. It doesn't mean, once again, extremes. It means more balance, and the balance may lie in proportions. You may need to eat more of a certain type of food, but you don't exclude the others in total.
Okay. Yes, and also keep in mind that pyroluria, as Dr. Mensah mentioned previously, is a stress disorder. So that's going to be separate to your overmethylation. Now, once we get that in balance and we bring those numbers down, we have more leeway. So I appreciate what Dr. Mensah is saying about balance, and that's why, again, going back to everyone's so unique, and we need to titrate food like we do nutrients.
Thank you, Samantha. Deborah shares, since starting treatment for pyroluria and overmethylation, I seem to be hungry a lot more often. Why is this happening?
I'm going to actually answer this from a scientific perspective, and then Sammy, you can comment on this one. You're not alone in this, and what I want to share with you revolves around your tongue. And most people have one, and most people in this culture tend to enjoy pleasing it. One of the big challenges is when you have something like pyro disorder, you're deficient in zinc, anything that zinc would support and you're deficient in zinc is not going to function very well. Now, believe it or not, taste on the tongue requires zinc. The taste buds, the cells on your tongue, literally require zinc for adequate or optimal functioning. So when someone is zinc deficient, food doesn't really taste as good, no matter what you think, as it should. Now, once you start on a protocol involving fixing pyroluria and zinc, if you will, food actually tastes better. And so many people have a little bit of a time adjusting to that, and they don't realize why they're inhaling everything they see, because they're looking at it, it looks good, and it tastes much better. So that is one of the potential mechanisms that we have seen that happens to a few folks. Sammy?
Yes, this is another great question. And this is something that I want to encourage you will balance out as your body, what I like to call is upgrading. You're getting new software in a sense. So we mentioned epigenetics is kind of the software to your DNA's hardware. So, we're upgrading you. So I appreciated what Dr. Mensah had to say. It kind of reminded me of, in zinc deficiency, there's often a lack of taste for meat. And a lot of my female patients who are zinc deficient, they're also on the anorexic side because not only do they not want meat because it doesn't, there's a texture, a lot of textural issues. It just feels it's like if it doesn't taste good, I don't want this weird texture in my mouth. I get that a lot. And then, other things don't taste good. So they just don't feel like eating. And I think that when we start, what I see a lot of is when we start introducing the nutrients to balance out the body, those raw building materials that I mentioned previously, zinc being a powerful one. The body's going, wow, thank you, I love this. This is what I've been wanting all this time, and now you're giving it to me, thank you. And so there's this kind of adjustment period. So I feel like that's what's going on. But wonderful question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and Sammy, you brought up something interesting, the whole texture phenomenon, which we don't talk about too much. But folks, remember that people who have pyrrole disorder can also be texture sensitive. And it's not just the clothing that you wear. It can be literally the types of foods you want to eat in terms of how they sort of fit on the tongue and what you derive, from that. So texture sensitivity and pyroluria can affect food selection.
Especially in our picky young patients.
Oh, yeah.
We have, and that's something that, is a challenge. As you know, Doctor, it's quite a challenge to work with. So, again, I think once chemistry starts to balance out, we notice those things getting better, especially with our young patients. They're more apt to want more foods and ask for more healthy food because they're feeling better.
Thank you. Shelley shares, I am a psychotherapist and holistic health coach in New York who specializes in treating ED issues, eating disorders, and have followed WASH and Mensah closely. Who do you recommend in New York City as you cannot send out blood work in the state? How would you recommend collaborating care with patients I treat?
Well, in terms of the blood work scenario, what I would actually suggest you do is to contact Direct Health Labs. They can certainly guide you to an appropriate facility that unfortunately is going to lie outside of New York City in order to get those elements collected. But working with Direct Health is fabulous because they will look to help you find the means to get your patients tested.
All right. Thank you, Shelley. Sandra shares, I've had severe reactions for food for a long time. I'm finally better. But now that I'm better, I've gained 30 pounds and can't lose it. I feel so hungry when I try to change my diet, but I'm really eating no differently than before. Yet I've gained all this weight, heavier than I've ever been. Could there be a psychological connection to the weight gain? I had a fear of food for so long.
Great question.
Absolutely. This is another great question. I experienced this. Thank you so much for this question. I had spent, again, my issues with food started, at a very, very early age. And, we're talking about 30 years here of this kind of back and forth. And when you get into this cycle, and there's this fear around food for so many years, again, going back to emotional markers affecting DNA. And of course, when that happens, your hormones and things, hormones being the chemical messengers of our bodies, and then, we're talking about these raw materials that we need to build that. I want to say that I'm so glad that you're feeling better and doing better. So I want you to know I'm really proud of you for figuring that out. But what I often see, and again, personally have experienced, is that once we kind of start to normalize things, our weight increases. And that, I'll be honest with you, that happened to me while I was going through my healing journey after meeting Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman. I just had this period of, I don't know, a year and a half or so of just kind of struggling with my hormones in a sense. Now, things were balancing themselves out, but I think also in the beginning, I still had a lot of those same patterns of emotional markers affecting things. So I feel, and I want to encourage you to keep on the path that you're going. If you haven't gotten tested, you might want to consider that because there are, again, biochemical underpinnings to that we can take a look at. But that's not uncommon, and I hope that's helpful. Dr. Mensah, do you want to add on to that?
Something very short and simple. I think that's a fabulous question, and it really speaks to a great deal of individuality. I would strongly suggest you give Samantha a call and maybe look to have her guide you in this process, because she certainly has a tremendous amount of insight, and there are a tremendous number of variables that could be producing your weight gain here. So I strongly suggest give Samantha a call. I think that would be just great guidance for you.
All right, and I want to chime in and say that we will run a little later tonight because we got a bit of a late start. So I just wanted to put that out there if someone was concerned about getting their questions answered. Right. Dana asks, well, Dana has something to share. She says, so far, all of my tests have made me look fairly healthy, but I know there's no possible way this can be. I have 200 pounds to lose. I'm very discouraged. Every diet I try, I struggle with my mind so badly. I have terrible depression.
Okay. I don't know what tests are being referred to, but if there's truly terrible depression, there's going to be some biochemical balance statistically somewhere. So if, Dana, your testing has been our type of testing, I suggest you have it retested, or perhaps look more in depth in a few other areas. But certainly this is another really great case for Samantha, especially with regard to that weight loss. And 200 pounds is certainly on the heavier side, but not insurmountable. Okay, by no means is that insurmountable without going to extremes. But be patient, it will take time. Sammy, why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mensah. This reminds me of a patient that I worked with in the past that was about, I guess about 170 pounds. That she was overweight. She was about 170 pounds. Of course, she wanted to lose, I don't know, 40 pounds or so for her height. And she needed to get tested, but she'd already had a barrage of tests from other practitioners. But one thing I want around testing that I want to share, and she also had severe depression and anxiety, by the way. But around testing, I think that the testing that Mensah Medical does, testing that we do, is unique. We're looking at specific markers, and I think that I want to share that not all testing is created equal. I guess that's where I'm going with this, and there could be a number of variables with regard to your situation, and we can certainly talk about that and look at that. But the key here is that there are there's some depression, and I think that there's a big connection there. It could be copper toxicity and estrogen. It could just could be a wide variety of things. But I think most people, or rather I should say that what I see is that there's confusion around labs and testing. And I just want to impress upon our listeners that the kind of testing that we do is really quite different from what you would get from, more of a conventional doctor, if you will.
Yes. And certainly, thank you, Sammy. You are so articulate. I love it. There's also interpretation. Many doctors can look at the same laboratory, and with a different set of eyes, some will see a problem and others will see nothing. So you also have to be aware of what to look for with regard to testing, because as Samantha said, different laboratory tests are not standard, they're not the same, but if you don't have the experience in the background to realize the factors that can affect laboratory testing, you still may not be getting appropriate results either. Okay, next question.
All right. Susan asks, we heard about dogma around the vegan diet. I've been curious about reading about the ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
I do know to be wary of extremes, but I am intrigued by the ketogenic diet. What do you say to people thinking about that diet?
Okay, Sammy, I'm going to start this one because I think I relate to you my experience there. And folks, we all know I'm not the nutritionist here between the two of us, but I've got to tell you, one of my family members, I'll not say whom, thought it would be very interesting as she was reading a book on the ketogenic diet to actually try it, and suggested that I try it with them. And I'm not giving away my chemistry here, so you folks who know me don't even try to think about this here. But I decided, okay, I would go ahead and do this, and so we looked at the different phases as we went from week 1 through week 3. And folks, I can tell you from the get-go, I was miserable. I was cognitively just miserable from day 1 to day 2. I remember by day 3, I said, wait, how long do we have to go through this? I mean, it was horrible. And now, folks, look, those of you who know me, you know I'm a carnivore. I love meat, okay? But I could not do this type of a diet day in and day out. And if you're doing it for weight loss and you do it kind of right and you've got the right chemistry, that might work for you. But there are certainly people who could be normal in methylation, or they could be over-methylated, whatever, for whom this type of diet will not only not work, but it can actually make it very difficult for you to function on a day-to-day level. Now, my other family member, they were just fine. Nothing seemed to change in life for them. They stayed fairly balanced with it all. But for me personally, it was a very difficult situation to go through. And I wasn't going to mention this ketogenic trial that I had earlier. I was going to stay away from it. But since someone brought it up, I felt I had to really put it out there. The ketogenic diet may have its benefits for some individuals, but for others it can be very, very difficult and not worth the challenges that are gone through.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, Dr. Mensah. I've done various forms of ketogenic diets in the past, personally, being under-methylated, not such a good idea. And I agree with Dr. Mensah. I think it certainly has its application in certain instances that is too much to go into at this time, but it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable long term. What happens when you go on vacation? What's going to happen when you go to a party or a special function? And I know the whole basis of, when you get into ketosis, there's no hunger. And I certainly experienced that for a time. But again, long term, we need to be very careful. We also need to be very careful about fats, especially if, and Dr. Mensah chimed in, especially when we're dealing with these types of chemistries that Dr. Mensah and I work with on a day-to-day basis. Fats can be a real problem for certain chemistries. So I see, I've had a lot of bipolar patients try the ketogenic diet, and it just made things worse. I could go on and on. So I would just say proceed with caution, but not at all if you have any of the chemistries that we're talking about.
Okay. Kylie asks, what are your thoughts on fermented vegetables, and if someone says they can't tolerate them?
This is a great question. Thank you for this question. Oh, man, I have a lot to say on ferments. I used to do my own ferments for years. Again, a big part of vegetarian and vegan diet. I think they certainly have their application. But, again, when we're talking about certain chemistries, I feel that they are detrimental in many instances. So I actually leave them off of an initial protocol. We go in phases. That's the way Dr. Mensah and I work. We start with phase 1. And it's a phase where we're starting off at a low dose of things and we work our way up. As I mentioned, I do that with food as well. If there are a lot of gut issues, you need to be very mindful of fermented vegetables. Here's the other thing. I do not trust, and this is me personally, and I've done my own ferments in a special German fermenting pot and, store-bought. I do not trust the process. I think that what I have found, and I've done a lot of experiments with ferments, is that you're also getting a lot of bad bacteria growing on those ferments. So what happens? It's going to trigger a response. So if you're reacting poorly to ferments, that tells me that you have a GI issue that we need to address. Whether it's whatever dysbiosis, whether it's SIBO or you're yeasty, that really needs some more in-depth analysis. So I would encourage you to stay away from those until you can get properly tested.
Thank you, Samantha. Nanette shares, there seems to be different kinds of zinc. Is there a particular kind you suggest?
Yes, and once again, the question is, what is it you're looking for the zinc to actually do? There are several different types of zinc. There's zinc picolinate, there's zinc citrate, there's zinc gluconate, there's zinc fumarate, zinc succinate. There are a variety of zincs out there. When we look at correcting chemistry, our standard zinc that we utilize is zinc picolinate. The picolinate form we find to be best absorbed with the greatest efficacy, statistically speaking. So it's zinc picolinate for us as the mainstream. We do actually use other forms of zinc for different reasons, none of which I'm going to tell you about, okay? But I want you to understand the answer to your question. For us, it's zinc picolinate. There are others to be determined by your doctor, okay, for particular usages.
Thank you, Nanette. Anne asks a question also about the ketogenic diet. So Anne, Dr. Mensah and Samantha did touch upon that. If you feel like there's something more specific you want to ask about the ketogenic diet, feel free to pop that question in again. Paula shares, I am confused about the recommendation for an under-methylated person to eat animal protein, which is naturally high in histamine. Can you clarify?
Yes.
This is a great question. Oh, sorry, Dr. Mensah, did you?
Well, Sammy will both tackle this one because there's a two-parter here. Okay, there's a difference between what's happening with regard to histamine in the brain versus what's happening in the GI tract, okay, in the gut and diet. You have natural elements that Sammy can talk more about in the GI tract that are designed to break down dietary histamine. Okay, so in the teeter-totter counterbalancing perspective here, you've got food being a separate issue than brain chemistry. Okay, the histamine in the foods you eat are not going to affect methylation primarily. They are possibly a secondary challenge, but when we're looking at undermethylation, there's far more to be gained from the methyl in those meats than the histamine. They're not the same thing. Histamine and methyl have a diametrically opposed relationship. When histamine is high, methyl is low. So now you've got a source, aka the meat, which is actually very rich in protein. That protein gets broken down into methyl, which is what the system needs to provide methyl for methylation. So the undermethylator benefits far greater than he or she loses with regard to any potential histamine challenge because of the overwhelming content of protein and therefore future methyl in the system. Sammy?
Yeah, that's wonderful. Also, as Dr. Mensah touched on, just want to make sure when we're looking at under versus over, and we're looking at a whole blood histamine rating, and we say that an undermethylator is high in histamine, that's just a marker. That's just what we use to determine methylation status. There's a big difference, and I get this question a lot, and I love this question, by the way. There's a big difference between something, say like a mast cell disorder, and undermethylation. People think they're one and the same. Now, as Dr. Mensah shared, they can present in the same patient. We do see that. But what I'd like to share is that I would say across the board, most undermethylators do very well on proteins. Now, if there is a little bit of a histamine intolerance issue in addition to the undermethylation, which we do see, there are ways to get around that. Now meat specifically, if they are in the refrigerator for a certain period of time, yes, the more histamine is going to accumulate. You can freeze your meats right after you get them. You could ask your butcher to fresh grind your hamburger in front of you, and then take that home and put it in the freezer. That significantly cuts down on the amount of histamine that is produced. So I just want to share with you there are ways to get around that, but they are completely separate issues that we deal with.
Thank you. Brent asks, does acid reflux medication adversely affect digestion?
And the very simple answer is maybe. Yes, indeed, a lot of these medications can affect digestion both directly and indirectly because they shift literally what the stomach and acidity contents are doing. When you change acidity, you are also going to change what's called the pH. That is really sort of the chemical level at which certain enzymes, digestive enzymes, function. If you go too high in pH, some enzymes will stop working. If you go too low in pH, some enzymes or other enzymes will actually not work very well. So this is something that really on a medication case-by-case basis has to be evaluated and discussed with your doctor. Most doctors will tell you, yes, this is going to change the acidity in your stomach, and so you may not be able to digest these types of foods very easily, and they might suggest taking digestive enzymes. Okay, Sammy, why don't you comment here as well?
Yeah, great question. If there is a need for those types of medications or that class of medications, and then we really need to do, or I encourage you rather, to do some further investigation with a trained practitioner on what's going on in your gut, because there's a connection there. I'm not sure what your diet is like, but I often see those types of symptoms in someone that is drinking sodas, that has more of a processed food diet, and you may not have that diet. I don't want to make that assumption. I appreciate the question. If you're eating a whole foods diet and you're still having those symptoms, then I would encourage further investigation into what's going on in your gut, because there's definitely a connection there.
Okay, and I want to chime in and share that we're going to take a few more questions and then we're going to wrap up. But before we conclude, I'm going to share information about a Facebook Live session where we'll be able to keep the conversation going this Friday. So if your question was not answered tonight, there's still a chance to speak with Dr. Mensah and Samantha on Friday. So we'll get to, as I mentioned, a few more questions. Catherine asks, how many times a week should an overmethylator have some vegetables?
How many times a week?
Yes.
Oh, daily.
There you go.
Every meal.
There you go. I was gonna chime in and say, how many times a day should an overmethylator have vegetables?
Yeah, exactly.
This is a cornerstone of dietary regimen for the overmethylator. And despite whether he, mostly he's, but whether he or she believes they enjoy the vegetables, they're likely going to find that their mental clarity and processing is going to improve. They'll have a better sense of satisfaction and functional satiety eating more vegetables several times a day than they did otherwise.
Absolutely. And the protocol that I write for an over-methylator always includes ample vegetables with every meal. Now, here's the thing, going back to multiple chemistries in the same individual, which is more common than not, if you are also copper toxic, a lot of plant foods are also high in copper, like kale, like spinach. So I just want to encourage you, and spinach is it's one of the highest in folate. So I just want to encourage you, there needs to be some delicacy here with the things that you're choosing if you have multiple chemistries. But yeah, that's a great question. Every meal is really going to help you best.
Yeah, and Sammy, you mentioned kale. I'm glad you brought it up because kale is everywhere. And listen, folks, I caution a lot of undermethylators about kale, but if you're an overmethylator, listen, kale your heart out, okay? Go for it. This is good stuff for you, okay? Live it up and enjoy it.
Vicky shares, I'm high copper and overmethylated at 54. I've been watching my diet and taking my supplements. I want to know how to deal with my changing hormones and weight. I'm not gaining anymore, but I haven't lost weight.
That's a great question.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was going to turf it over to you, Sammy. Go right ahead.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would say, here's the thing about copper toxicity and estrogen, especially as we get older. I think that, and of course I'm not sure how long, Dr. Buford, the question mentioned how long, correct? She's been on the nutrients.
1 second. No, she didn't mention how long.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long we've been on the diet and the nutrients. I think that these things take time. I'll share. It took me a good year and a half to really get to a good place. And even then, I was in a fantastic place mentally. I was very healthy. Even then, my weight, it was fluctuating. It was like my hormones were saying, okay, thank you, I've got all these nutrients. Copper is in a good zone. Methylation is better. You're feeling better. But I feel like often weight is the last thing to kind of normalize. And I know that's hard to hear. Trust me, I get it. I want you to know I get it. But I want to encourage you to hang in there. You might need adjustments to your protocol. So I would encourage you to reach out. But I do, especially as we get older and this fluctuation with our hormones, and again, there's that copper and estrogen connection that we really need to be mindful of. I feel like it does take time. So honestly, that's my very best answer. Unless Dr. Mensah, you would like to add anything to that?
For a change, no.
All right, so our last question comes from Diane. She's asking for some clarity. She says, so if you are undermethylated and you need less folate, but if you have a MTHFR, you need more folate? I am confused.
Yes, and
This is Dr. Mensah's question.
Thank you, Sammy.
Good one.
And you're confused, and so is much of the planet, quite honestly. And that's because of widespread mythology around what MTHFR is and what it does. Now, please understand me, folks. This is not Dr. Mensah and ego speaking here. I'm speaking to you about what science says, dating back to Carl Pfeiffer, the man from whom all of this really derives, and from Dr. William Walsh, his mentor, his mentee and colleague, and really in my estimation, the major guru of methylation on this planet. Okay, and I mean functional, not theoretical. We already know by testing it is the sum total of many biochemical reactions that determine what your methylation status is. For those of you who don't know, she's referring to the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase enzyme, MTHFR, and the genetic test to determine whether or not they may be a function or a dysfunction in that particular enzyme. While yes, the enzyme is a major variable in methylation, it is exactly as I said, it is a major variable in methylation. There are 14 or so other major enzymes involved in methylation, and it is the sum total. There are X number that are involved in undermethylation, and there are X+1 numbers involved in overmethylation, and there's a tug of war between the two groups of enzymes. Now, the winner of that tug of war in any individual determines methylation status. Okay, so number one, it's not just one enzyme. Number two, the MTHFR, even if you've got a SNP or two, the enzyme is so huge that being homozygous or having two SNPs, two mutations in that enzyme, is kind of like saying you've got two flat tires on a giant truck that's 3 miles high and 5 miles long. Are those two flat tires going to stop the truck from moving? Folks, it's not. Okay? So don't worry about the MTHFR. The MTHFR, even when you read it, it says it is estimated, that's number one, estimated that there may be, that's number two qualifier, a 30 to 40% defect in the functionality of this enzyme if you are homozygous. That is, if you've got two SNPs. Maybe and might are not things you want to base your treatment protocol on. It does not determine your status. Remember, genes are simply blueprints. The fact that there may be a problem with the gene doesn't actually mean that that problem is going to show up in how you function. So, for example, in standardized medicine, we hear that, okay, 1 in every 1,000 people who've got Crohn's disease actually has the gene for it. Now, there may be 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. This is being illustrative, but point being, 999 people who've got Crohn's disease don't have the gene for it. So what does that tell you? Genes are about potential. They are about maybes. We've got actual testing that says this is what's happening in your system now. So don't worry about the MTHFR with regard to your methylation status. It does not move in that direction. Now, let's say you're like, well, what makes these guys think they know the answer to this? And okay, Pfeiffer, I get it, blah, blah, blah. Well, don't listen to me. Look this up for yourself. And I know many of you undermethylators out there will. Go to Harvard's website, and under Harvard Research, Google MTHFR and methylation. Then go to the Mayo Clinic and do the same. Both of these groups, and I think that most of us would agree that the folks from the Mayo Clinic, arguably the most awesome hospital facility in the United States, and Harvard, you know, they're not exactly full of dummies. They might know something about science and research. Both groups have stated in their research that the MTHFR testing does not accurately reflect methylation. I know I harp on this a lot, folks, but it's just so out there, and we get this question so often, I want to make it very clear. Do your own research. Go out there and look it up. But I can tell you now, it does not reflect methylation. When you follow those protocols, people may get better for a couple months, and then they get worse or stay the same. They don't improve. That's because they're looking at the wrong thing. Don't worry about your MTHFR test result if it's about mental health. Now, if it's about multiple sclerosis or autism, that's a whole different story, okay? But as far as the mental health world is concerned, don't worry about that. Do your histamine testing, find out what your histamine is showing you about your methylation, follow that process, and get better.
Thank you, Dr. Mensah. All right, so as I mentioned, we'll be continuing the conversation via Facebook Live this Friday, that's June 23rd, at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you can join the Facebook Live session via facebook.com/MensahMedical. Samantha will be joining us again, sharing her brilliance with us again this Friday. So be sure to stay tuned for that.
First of all, I want to thank Samantha for joining us tonight and taking her time to really share with us her insights and her knowledge. She is just a fabulous wealth of knowledge, folks. If you guys haven't talked to Samantha or contacted her, I really suggest you do. There's so much to be learned from her, and we learn a lot as well. So please feel free. I don't think Samantha will mind terribly. And Sammy, thank you so much for joining with us tonight, and we look forward to our session on Friday.
Great. Likewise, thank you for having me, Dr. Mensah, and likewise, thank you for being my mentor, and I'm blessed to have the opportunity to learn from you, so thank you so much.
Well, we are the ones who are honored, Sammy. Thank you for just sharing. It's so important for people to hear what other people go through, and you have just been instrumental in shifting lives, and I want to thank you for not cowering behind your challenges, but stepping boldly to address them and moving in the realm of recovery and enjoying life the way you should be. I want to thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Also, Mensah Medical is based in Warrenville, Illinois. However, we have outreach clinics where we travel around the country, and Dr. Mensah and Dr. Bowman will be in Fort Lauderdale, Florida next week, June 27th and June 28th. So if you're in that area, you can schedule an appointment. Also, in July, they'll be in Garden Grove, California, July 31st and August 1st, and in Annapolis, Maryland, September 19th and September 20th. You can also visit our website at mensahmedical.com to learn about other regional outreach clinics near you. And as a reminder, you can contact our patient care specialist, Nancy, at mensahmedical.com, or call 630-256-8308 to make an appointment. We would love to hear from you. And if you are interested in working with Samantha Gilbert, you can contact her at info@samanthagilbert.com and visit her website at samanthagilbert.com.